بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. I actually feel compelled to start by saying that the my self photo that I use as an avatar on all social media outlets actually portrays me as a much taller being. I've been told this time and time again, and I feel it very fitting to tell you this right now, because for people of shortish stature like myself and my fellow vertically challenged brethren, the podium is our bane of our existence. And so we're doing things a little bit differently. I will remain seated with three amazing panelists, and we're actually having a discussion panel this time. And what I'll do is I'll basically just say a quick word about the panelists and then give them a few minutes to say something themselves. I'd like to kind of start off with Noura, closest to our hearts, fellow Sharjonian. So Noura has had some experience with writing for children, as well as recently stealing the headlines with the region's first kind of Arabic science fiction novel. And she's kind of my mother geek of sorts. Don't let the looks deceive you. She is a geek through and through. She knows her stuff. She loves fantasy and science fiction, and she decided to take that into her debut title for young adults called Ajwan. A little bit further, Fatima Sharafeddine is, if you ask me, an Emirati. She is Lebanese. The documents actually point towards her being Lebanese, but she is always among us in all our literary festivals and festivities, and she's no stranger to the UAE. And this is something that we benefit to a great extent from her being with us. My children are vastly fond of her writing. And I know both Noura and Fatima for a very long time. And I had the honor of meeting, to the very end of the stage, Randa. Randa Abdel-Fattah actually hails from way down under. So more than a hop and a skip away. She's Australian. And I'm really hoping that we are able to win her over and have her kind of join us on these kinds of events more. So Randa, maybe you can start off by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thank you for having me here. 15-hour flight to get here. It took me 6 hours just to leave my country. My background, I'm in Australia. When you're part of a minority culture, when you talk about background, you immediately talk about your identity hyphens. Mm-hmm. And the way I would say is I'm Australian-born Muslim, Palestinian, Egyptian, which of course meant I had a recipe for an identity crisis when I was a teenager and growing up. My father's Palestinian, my mother's Egyptian, and I suppose because you live as a minority, you can either completely reject your identity hyphens, or you can even be more strongly embrace them. And I've come from a family which more strongly embraced our identity and sort of have a very strong sense of my identity as someone who is of Arabic heritage and Muslim faith. And it's something that I have been very interested in from the point of view of young people struggling to deal with their identity in Western societies, and something that really inspired me to write about these issues from a young age.
Great. Noura?
What do you want to know?
Whatever you feel like sharing.
I started out by, I almost always start by saying, I'm older than my country. And I was very fortunate in that I was raised in my grandfather's library. And so I've been around books all my life. Mm-hmm. Wanted to study English because it's the easiest thing to do when I was growing up, and so that's exactly what I did. Never thought I'd become a writer, although some people sitting in the front seat did. Sheikh Badur told me, I think you can write for children. And I said, nah, I can't. But then I did take a stab at it, and apparently I can write. And I decided not to write in the language that's easiest for me. I decided to write in Arabic. and here I am.
There you go. I can definitely relate to that. Writing in a language you're not more comfortable with is quite the challenge.
Yes.
Fatima?
I'm Fatima Sharafeddine. I come from Lebanon. I think I was born as a writer, but I only started actually writing 10 years ago. I started publishing in 2004 in Lebanon. And since then, I'm a full-time writer, and I'm immersed in the field. I started as something, it was my passion, I wanted to do it, and I was having fun, and all of a sudden, I'm right there in the middle of the field, and I have a big responsibility. So I'm a full-time writer. I write with several publishers, mainly with Kalimat here in the UAE, and several of my books have been translated. I had the opportunity to meet publishers in Belgium since I was residing there, and that opened opportunities to translate my books to French and other languages.
Awesome.
My last book, which was translated, was my young adult book, Fatima, was published in Canada, just out in English. So I'm proud of it.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Well, now we know a little bit more about our panelists, and what I'll be doing is I may or may not kind of leave some space for questions at the end. It just depends on how this flows. But I wanted to kind of point out that we've heard fascinating presentations about experiences with various chapters of IBI. We've also talked about some of the challenges and how difficult it is to promote reading. But I can guarantee you this, it's really difficult to promote reading among the young adults if there are no books. So here we are talking about the actual challenge of putting these books together, of creating them, of putting them together. And I want to actually start off by, let's make this distinction about children's books and young adults. I've heard them kind of clumped together in this region quite frequently. And let's start with the definition. Anyone care to kind of point out what young adult is? Because that's kind of the focus of our panel discussion here. How would you differentiate that from children's?
Yeah, you're right. They have been mixed up all along. Then, actually, we have to define what a young adult is first. In our cultures, this is a dismissed age group. I mean, we are children, and then we're adults. And young adults is this awkward age where we're not children, but we're dismissed. And it's a very a period of time where there's a lot of turmoil, there's a lot of changes, body changes, mind changes, the identity crisis, and all of these. And it's really difficult to deal with this age group, so we dismissed it. And until the generation of my parents, this did not exist. I mean, they got married at 15, 16, and they were adults all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So only my generation now, and of course, generations to come. Now there is this age group which is very open to the world through internet, through all social media, and they don't have enough genuine literature in the Arab, originally written in Arabic.
Yeah.
And that's because we don't have a history of that. So we have to create the history of Arabic books for young adults. And that's a big, big challenge.
Absolutely. I think there are kind of two ways to look at this. We can either look at it and say, well, it seems like we don't have much of a well-defined young adults industry, and so, woe is us, basically. Or we can actually see that as, hey, this is a clean slate, let's start something new. And I think, would you agree with me that we actually do not have a well-defined there seems to be a lot more activity in children's literature than there is in young adults in the region.
That's true, and because it wasn't defined also. And then there are the middle graders who are somewhere in the middle. So you can't really clump them all, as you said, in one. And plus, even in the West, young adult literature has only been very recent. They didn't used to call it young adult. It was just literature for children, and then there's the other literature. But young adult is also quite recent. And so it's not surprising that in the Arab world we've just discovered al-Yafi'in and we're writing for them. But it's, as you said, it's such a great opportunity, such a golden opportunity for us to actually create something.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think you can either look at it very cynically, which is, like in my experience with publishers, the idea of young adult is quite often a marketing strategy. So when I wrote my first book, Does My Head Look Big in This? I wrote it about young adults, but not for young adults. I wanted a general audience. When I had written my young adult books, Scholastic approached me and said, there's this new market out there, tween fiction. And this is the middle grade fiction. So they're not, they're from about ages of 9 to 12. And so, that they wanted me to start writing for tweens, as opposed to young adults. So we have to also be conscious that these sometimes are marketing strategies because they serve a purpose of promoting you to a certain audience. But by the same token, I think that there was a resistance to calling young adults because traditionally there is a bit of snobbery about writing for children. It's not seen as literary. And so, for example, I know in Australia, America and the UK, writers often bemoan the fact that adult writers get a lot more exposure. The festivals there are more patrons at the festivals. Australia has really changed now. There's a lot more sort of prestige in being a writer for children, but there was this time when writing for adults was not seen as serious enough. When I know from my experience, I've written for adult audience, for tweens and for young adults, and by far the hardest age group to write about is young people, because you are in some way limited in terms of the, not the subject matter necessarily, but the maturity of your characters is more limited. So you're working with different constraints there. So I find it more challenging, but a lot more enriching.
I've often personally wrestled with this idea of why is it so challenging to crack this puzzle? Why is it so difficult? And I want to provoke you with what I'm going to say, and I'm hoping to get some very kind of passionate responses. Is we cannot have a young adult writing for a young adult the same way we can have like an engineer writing a technical manual for another engineer. We're not of the same kind, By the time we're calling ourselves authors and writers and everything, we're no longer young adults. And so how do we even remotely
relate?
Exactly, relate to our audience?
The same way we relate to children when we write for them. It's interesting what you said, you write about them, not to them. I think what distinguishes young adult literature is it's like adult literature.
Yes,
it has all the literary merit. I mean, it has to be an art, but the protagonists are young adults. I mean, this is a difference. You're talking about the age group, a different age group, but it has to have all the components of a novel for adults.
So what, the follow-up to that is, what would you think are the distinctions? If it has all the characteristics of adult fiction, then what makes it young adult?
The style. I mean, young adults now are used to fast. Everything is fast. Fast food, pop culture, and internet. They play a game. It finishes in 5 minutes. They go to another game. They have a very, very fast, lively life around them. So the style has to reflect that. It has to be fast-paced, has to be funny. They make fun of themselves, young adults.
Yes.
They have a sense of humor, and you have to put that in their literature. It has to be fast, vibrant. It has to look like their life. It has to be
And
close.
you can't insult them, really. I mean, I've often seen people write for teens, and they insult them by thinking, oh, they wouldn't get this, let me write for them in a different way. Really, we have to treat them like the human beings that they are, that they really do get it, and that they have their own issues, and we need to also talk about their issues and not think that, these are like tween issues. We're not going to be talking about that. Also, it has to be relevant to them also at the same time, but without demeaning them.
I think we... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go on.
I think we also have stereotypes about young adults, and we have to overcome these. I mean, when we say a 15-year-old girl, we think makeup, hair, nails, That's not all. And when we think about boys, it's sports, Game Boys, girls, whatever.
Yeah.
So we have to overcome these. I mean, they're complex human beings dealing with many difficult issues and identity crisis, the relationship with their family, with their father, with their mother, and they're very complex. So we have to reflect that in literature and not just pinpoint only stereotypes that we have built.
Yeah, it's so true. There are lots of stereotypes, and if you fall into it, you become patronizing. And I think the difference is, and forgive me if I'm being presumptuous here, but my experience with speaking to writers from the Middle East is there is a tendency, especially with children's books, to be very preachy. And there's a difference between being moral and moralizing. And that if you can strike that difference, then you are able to write a book that will strike a chord with young adults. But if you are preaching, you're never going to win them.
No.
And I think for me, the reason that I was attracted to writing about young people is, you know, when you look at what are the most important things in life, well, if you were to ask someone who's on the edge of starvation, it would be food. Someone who's dying of cold, it would be warmth. You know, but if we strip away all that, we all need food and warmth and to be loved and cared. But ultimately, there is one thing that every human being needs to figure out, and that is, you know, what is the meaning of life and why am I here? And what excites me so much about young adults is that's when they start asking those questions. So I don't think that you ever feel as intensely and passionately and deeply as you do in that journey from adolescence. And that's what attracts me to writing about young adults, more than the fact that it's, you know, there are serious issues to be discussed and addressed. It's the excitement of the stories that adolescence lends itself to.
Well, allow me to play devil's advocate here and kind of forget for a second that I myself write for young adults as well, and call you young adult authors all sorts of nasty names and say that you are, you know, you're letting down our youth. You're not instilling values in them. You're just writing stuff that's entertaining. What's the use of the books that you write? They're supposed to be beneficial. They're supposed to have these positive values in them. You know, and where's your list of positive values? So,
But that's the problem.
shame on you. Shame on you for doing this to our children.
No, the
Do you not
problem-
care?
Exactly. The problem with young adult books in our culture, if they exist, they're moralizing, you know. I mean, we address them with, school books. Look at the texts that we make them read in school books. They're all full of morals and you know, old-fashioned ways of dealing
work.
with things.
They don't work.
Of course they don't work. I mean, you can pass...
Because that was my question as well. Aren't
any
morals a good
values.
thing? You know, what do we have against morals?
You have to transmit positive values, of course, but you have to lead your story in a way to be challenging, to get him to think about solutions and to get him to get to the positive values, you know. He goes through experiences in life, and if he does if he takes these choices, this is what's going to happen. So you give him choices, and you assume that the child...
Isn't there a risk inherent that, you know, the said child or young adult picks up a book and, you know, because of his lower mental capacity...
you know,
think sorry, I'm playing devil's advocate. I believe none of what I'm saying. You know, cannot process the value and meanings that you're trying to instill. And what if he just reads it and just has fun and nothing more than that?
Why not? Okay, even that, why not? I mean, look at all the internet they have access to, all the TV shows they see, you know, the violence they see. And there's input from everywhere. You have to trust them, and you have to trust them as a parent, you know.
Yeah, but
you
first
put
you have to
values
do your
in them
job as a
before
parent.
they started reading a book. So you're investing in them. The schools are investing in them, and you're putting a book between their hands, and they will take from it. You know, it's not only they won't lead their life according to one book they read,
That's right.
but they will do their own judgment. We have to trust them.
I think the assumption implicit in the devil's advocate that you're playing, but I've heard many times before, is that as a writer, we can control the way our words are interpreted. But the fact remains that when I write, my characters will go on to have thousands of relationships with individual readers, and I lose control.
Yes,
I have to
completely.
I have to let
relinquish.
go. Yeah, relinquish responsibility, not responsibility, because
No,
obviously
but the effect.
we censor, obviously there are choices about what I write, and I will ultimately write about values that I feel strongly about and stories that I want to tell. But ultimately, it is up to the reader to interpret and build a relationship with my characters, and I can't control how they're going to interpret it. And if I seek to control it, then I don't deserve to be a writer.
And actually,
I should
Like
be a
art,
preacher.
it's in the eye of the beholder, isn't
but
it?
when Fatima
Exactly.
said we have to trust our children, first of all, there's a, if I may add, a previous step to that, and that I should not have abdicated my responsibility towards my children to begin with. I should have already established what's right and what's wrong, so that whatever they read later on, whether it's something written for the West or something written for the Arab world or Muslims or non-Muslims, they already have that basis in which they can then go on and they can read anything. As a 15-year-old, I read Stephen King. My parents didn't know that I was reading Stephen King. If they knew, they would have killed me. But I'm still not an axe murderer. I'm not a serial killer, even though I read Stephen King, because, you know, that's it. It was already there. But what we're doing here in the Arab world mostly is that we've abdicated our responsibilities and we've given them, you know, very willingly, and because we don't want to be blamed, to schools, to teachers, to writers and authors, to publishing houses, to TV, to iPads, and then we want them not to do anything that will spoil our children, where on the other hand, we didn't do anything about our children. We did not raise our children. We want somebody else to raise our children, and we want that somebody else not to write anything that would turn them into bad people. Now, that is a very, very bad formula that's going to fail every time. I, as a writer, believe that I'm here to entertain. Now, have you ever seen a Disney movie you didn't like?
No.
Have
Not
you
a single
seen
one.
a Disney movie where you didn't cry? And I know you cried in one of them. You admitted it to me.
I'll cry right now if you give me half a chance.
No, you admitted it to me once. But really, did that Disney movie set out to teach us any lessons? It didn't. But every single time we watch a Disney movie, we've learned something new, a new value, without it being shoved into our faces or down our throats. And that's what we just need to do in the Arab world as well. Stop preaching and moralizing. Let's just stop doing it, because we've been doing it for decades and it doesn't work.
Agreed. And I think, you know, the point we're trying to make is if it actually starts at the point a young adult picks up a book, that's already way
It's
too late.
It's true.
Yeah, so,
I agree. I agree.
But okay, now I personally, I think my inner child is extremely alive, very resilient little guy. I still play games. I still play Lego, jigsaws, all sorts of plastic model hobbies, and all sorts of things like that.
And
But
Warcraft.
my question is, do you believe that there's a child in every single one of us and everyone beyond these walls? And if so, how important is it to kind of nurture that child as a young adult author?
Very good question. Anybody can have ideas for stories, for, you know, we have memories as young adults, as children, and we use them to write. But the problem in the Arab world is we don't have creative writing majors in universities for children and young adults. And this is a very big problem, I think. I mean, when I educated myself. I wasn't in Lebanon when I did my university, and I was lucky. But in the Arab world, there isn't, I mean, there are courses here and there, but there isn't a major of children's literature, and that's missing. I think our next step, if we want to come out from this conference with something, is to really think about this, how to develop children's literature in the Arab world. It's not only by recruiting new authors, new publishers, new illustrators, but really start from scratch, teach them.
Set the standards.
Teach them. I mean, in universities, that's
I mean, that brings me on to a very interesting point, is that in the books industry as a whole, and this is not something specific to young adults, it's probably highlighted more in more specific fields like young adults. But we have many missing pieces, don't we? I mean, you look at distribution, for example, that's quite a challenge. You look at marketing, that still leaves a lot to be desired. Even things like agents, for example. We had this discussion about the role of agents. the literary agent is non-existent in, I mean, at least in you know, in the Gulf. I don't know if it's the same in Lebanon or not, but
no, we don't have
so
agents.
what is it that we need to kind of, because it seems like our immediate reaction is to throw money at something and fix it by kind of sponsoring or spending or doing things like that. But what is it that you believe will have the most impact on the ground? What do we need to really take young adult books to the next level?
Well, can I give you some sort of perspective from Australia? And I think there was a time when there is a very strong children's literature, young adult literature scene in Australia. It's very strong, very successful. But a lot of the passion behind that is from the writers themselves. And it's about respecting the reader. And so, for example, there's an organisation that is dedicated to young adult fiction. And they hold an award every year called the Inkies Award, which is judged by young adults.
Wow.
So it's not adults.
Wow.
And what happens is that it's a national award. There are about, I think, 6 judges on that panel from all around Australia. And those teenagers, the requirement is that they must not be over the age of 25. And they are the ones who will judge the books. And that is a way of saying that this is about you. We are respecting your choice. We're not adults here telling you what you should read. And you know, out of every single initiative among young adult writers in Australia, I think that has been the most amazing, because it is elevating the reader to a significance, and that in turn creates a culture in which young adult readers are respected, and in turn it gets writers thinking about their audience and what matters. And it's not about the adult moralizing. You know, we're talking, this whole day is about how to get people to read, how to get young people to read. You need to write books that reflect their lives, and those lives are not necessarily going to be perfect. In fact, they're usually chaotic, you know, moments of absolute confusion and tension and troubles, and we all pretend that we didn't go through that, but we all did. That's adolescence. And it's exactly what you said. You need to show them the process and the journey rather than the result. Let them figure out the result. So I think if you start to introduce things, you know, awards that are judged by young adults. I was a judge on one of those awards. There was one adult among all the judges, but they created the long list. They created the short list, and it was phenomenal.
That's
Great.
very nice.
Noura or Fatima, what would you suggest? What would have the most effect on this industry? What do we need? What's the missing piece?
As I said, we need to start teaching creative children's literature in universities, but also as authors, we have to cooperate. We have to work together. We have to create critique groups. If I write something, I should be able to show it to Noura, tell me her opinion, and vice versa.
And accept
sit down together.
I should accept your opinion also.
Of
you know,
course,
'cause some
of course,
authors don't.
Of course. I'm part of a critique group online with people I don't know from around the world. We're 5, and it's really once a month we send either a picture book or a chapter from a young adult book, and we give each other critiques, and it's wonderful because how else who would critique you? I mean, that's also one thing that doesn't exist in the Arab world, is critiquing children's literature.
Great. Noura, can I prod something out of you?
Well, I think we really need to listen to them. We don't listen to our teens because we're so busy. I mean, I can't talk about other countries. And in the UAE, we need to listen to them. And their issues or the things that actually matter to them are different from other countries. And when we're writing, we should be writing for that group so that it becomes relevant and it becomes true. It can't be just a false thing, because children, and not children, I mean young adults more than children, they smell, they smell false tones, and so they're put off. So what we need to do is that also we need to see if there are genres in Arabic that are non-existent, and of course I'm talking about science fiction now, but then there are other genres also. There's goosebumps. how big of of a genre is that? And we don't have that in the Arab world. We have translated Goosebumps. So it's something that we need to also think about, is that if they're not reading if we want them to read in Arabic, we have to provide the right kind of themes. And if horror is what they want to read, let's write for them.
Of course.
Yeah. So what about, okay, we've kind of bashed the adults in us to no end, but there's got to be something good in us, right? I mean, I'm wondering, why the young adults are not writing for young adults. We're writing for them, so we must be bringing something good to the table. And so what is that something? What do you think is the thing that we are able to do? What are we able to add value with in being the people who write the books for the young adults?
We bring our experience. When I wrote my book, Fatima, for young adults, before writing it, I had a block. I knew I wanted to write for young adults, but I was stuck. Every time I thought about my life when I was a young adult, there was war in Lebanon.
Yes.
And I did not want to write about the war. So a friend told me, just write it, let it out. Put war as a background in the setting of your, and get it out. So I did that, and I think that's how I added my experience. I mean, that's how I offered something new to young adult literature. And now the war issue is behind my back. I should be writing something.
Yeah, this is actually an excellent segue into this very touchy point of censorship. And I'm actually not talking about the censor kind of, ripping pages out of books or something like that. I'm actually talking about self-censorship. Now, I like to read all sorts of different books personally, and I would stop myself long before any official censor would from writing those kinds of books. And I don't know quite why I do it. I think it's kind of fear of sort of like a public backlash, or look at him, look at what he's doing. Do you feel the same way? Do you kind of feel this this lingering self-censorship? Is it? Do you feel it?
Yeah. I can give you a perfect example.
Okay.
I wrote my first book for adults, and it's called No Sex in the City. And my self-censorship...
What were you thinking?
I know. And in fact, it was released at the same time as the very popular and trashy 50 Shades of Grey. So I had no hope, really, writing a book, No Sex in the City. But my censorship it's my dad. He's my best friend. And I send him my books. I say, is it okay, Dad? Going to go to the world? And he's my form of censorship. So my censorship is, if my dad can read it, I'm covered. It's okay. But I just wanted to quickly go back to what you said before about adults, why we can write for young adults. I, in fact, wrote my first book when I was 15.
Wow.
Does my head look big in this? I was 15. I was an angry teenager. It was the first Gulf War. This is when I was in high school. A pig's head was thrown in our school window. Our school was burnt. I went to an Islamic school. We had vandals write, "Go back home, you terrorists." Spat at wearing the hijab as part of our school uniform. And all of this negative backlash, I channeled into something positive. And I wanted to write a book about a young girl in Australia who decides to wear the hijab and her confrontation with people's prejudices. So I sent the first manuscript, which was about 70,000 words, to a publisher. I sent it to many publishers in Australia, and they were very interested, but ultimately rejected it because they said it was too preachy, moralizing. So about 9 years later, post-September 11, I returned to that manuscript, and I rewrote it. So that's the book that ended up being published, which I had started as a teenager, and what I had gained was experience. But more importantly, what I had gained was a sense of humor. And I think this is very important. It's something that I learned, that the more touchy and serious a subject, the more you should use humor, because that's a beautiful ingredient to avoid moralizing. And as a teenager, I was too angry. It was too raw. It was too personal. And I wasn't able to gain the perspective that a bit of experience and a sense of humor had offered me, and that's why it worked later on. So perhaps as adults we are able to look back with a sense of humor on, when you're in the thick of an embarrassing situation, it's so humiliating. It's only with time that it's something you can
gain
laugh
perspective.
about. Exactly.
That's something I'm going to be laughing about 10 years from
Yes.
But I'd like to kind of bring it back again to the issue of self-censorship. And I think about this personally a lot because I think a lot of the creativity really shines when you don't have anything to worry about.
I agree.
When you just have your pen and paper,
I
your
agree.
iPad and finger, or your computer and keyboard, basically, and you just go at it, and you let it all out, and you don't worry about what people will say.
Yeah.
So in absence of that, I worry for the kinds of titles that we'll be putting out there. How do you feel about this?
It is a big limitation, but I don't think we can break all the taboos tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think it comes gradually. I
Yes.
mean, the West, history of young adult books in the West started in the 1950s, and we are starting today. So when they started, they also had taboos, and they gradually broke them. So I think we just need the time and do it very smoothly and very smartly.
And choose our battles, really. You have to choose your battles, because if you want that book to come out and be read by a certain segment of society, you don't want to be, in conflict with them. What you need is to, just like you said, Fatima, to just move very slowly. I wouldn't say one taboo at a time, but one challenge at a time. You can't just do everything in one book. No one's going to buy it, or they're going to buy millions of it. Like 50 Shades of Grey. But usually what happens is that you get boycotted by a lot of people. And what's the point?
Yeah,
what really is the point? The point is, for me, when I censored myself, I was thinking of my 4 teenage daughters. Would I want them to read this, or wouldn't I, is what my censorship was.
Yeah.
But don't forget, I think sometimes there's a tendency to think anything is allowed in the West. There's this absolute freedom. Believe me, there's different sorts of censorship.
Yes.
For example, which I find very funny, the people I confront the most with censorship is my American publishers, which I find just so funny when they write back and say, we can't have this, it's a swear word.
Really?
I said, have you watched your television program? What are you talking about? And they're the ones I struggle with the most, my American publishers. But not only that, it's not just about there's different forms of censorship. The censorship that I deal with in the West is the censorship that only constructs Muslims and Arabs in terms of one particular sort of stereotype, which is the angry, hairy, bearded man or the oppressed Muslim woman.
Yes.
So I'm breaking through that mold. I'm breaking that taboo and saying, actually, there's a counter-narrative here. Or the other censorship is Palestine, which is something I'm very passionate about, trying to constantly change that narrative and say, actually, I'm going to write a book from the point of view of a Palestinian living and under occupation. So I need to break through the taboo that, oh my goodness, a Palestinian can be represented other than a terrorist. So, we have our battles as well, and there are some freedoms that you enjoy which I wish that we could enjoy.
True.
So this is why this sort of dialogue is fantastic, because we can learn from each other about ways to try and break those taboos.
Has anyone on the panel cracked what it is that young adults want? I mean, I always kind of imagine the adults trying to suggest something to an adolescent, and it's always like, the adolescent with hands deep in the pockets, kind of slouched and kind of rolling his or her eyes and just embarrassed by the sheer presence of an adult.
You don't understand me.
What is it that they want? Sometimes we feel like we have such great ideas, such wonderful suggestions, such amazing books to give them, yet we're more often than not met with a lot of cynicism, and they're like, this is totally not what we want. This is totally not cool.
But
So-
as she said, we have to give them something that relates to their life, but also they love fantasy, they love science fiction. I mean, we have to give them everything, all genres of
exactly.
literature.
There's no
It's
one-
like adult literature. Really.
There has to be a variety of it. I mean, it can't be just one thing, which is Harry Potter or science fiction or things that happen at school. I'll give you an example. I have, I've said this so often, I have 6 children. So
You have
each
6
one,
children. Wow. What skin
Who are no
products do
longer-
you use? You look amazing.
By the way, this is all I've heard
Who
from
are
Randa.
no longer children,
She's
by the
just
way.
shocked
So
at the
young.
number of children.
So one of them reads off and on. One of them is a bookworm. Then one reads very slowly, and one is very moody. One who is a bookworm And the last one, which I'm going to use as an example, Rhoda, she's the type that you were saying, they're the ones that are like very quiet and you don't know what they want. And I thought I would have to really bribe her. Her father bribes her consistently in order for her to read. But one time she was holding her iPod, not an iPhone, an iPod, and she was just looking at it intently, and you're wondering, an iPod is something that you listen to, it isn't something that you look at. And I said, what are you doing? And she said, I'm reading. Reading? Reading? What are you reading? She's reading Arabic. She's reading Ammiya, Emirati dialect Arabic. It's a discussion forum for young people who write about whatever it is that they want to write about. It's a story, it's in episodes, بالعامية, and it's about school life, basically. She reads it. I didn't know she reads it.
Wow.
But, you know, sometimes you can't thrust things at them. They will pick what they want. And you just need to be perceptive and just listen to them when they ask for something.
And you touch upon a point. I mean, young adults read. You know,
Yes.
they read, all of them do, you know, but they're reading text messages and like, you know, things off
140
iPods. And, you know,
characters.
we need to get them to maybe try the printed formats of books as well. But what are the challenges for writing in Arabic? Anything specific to the region or the language or
No,
the
we just
traditions?
have to
or-
remember that we are multicultural also. I mean, when I write a book, I'm living in a specific country, Arab country, let's say in Lebanon. I'm writing about the Lebanese, I don't know, teenage. There is some differences, you know, between our different cultures.
Yeah.
So we have to remember that also. And that's, I think it's also a challenge, why the book is, you know, young adult literature is still very متعثرة.
Yeah.
It's still very bumpy road because we have lots of challenges to surpass.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. They're used to textbooks which use terminology and phrases that are completely alien to them. They are literally, and I remember a paper that was given by Sheikh Abadur once, where she said our children are born bilingual to begin with, because there's the Arabic that they get in school, and then there's the Arabic that they use at home. And so sometimes we need to bridge that huge gap by using Arabic that's also used in daily life. But they're used to Arabic being just school textbooks Arabic, and therefore it's, I don't know, I don't want anything to do with it, I don't want to read it. Several of my children have not read my novel yet. Mama, when is it going to come out in English?
You can still write in Fusha. You can still write in Fusha, but you have to find a new way to express yourself.
Yes,
I mean,
a
to
fluid
get
kind
away
of,
from the classical cliches of language and come up with easy, fast,
Very fast. It's
fast
exactly
pace,
that, fast.
vibrant language.
Well, it also seems to me that whether it's books or any sort of content that's for young adults, there seems to be like a duplicity of audiences. There's the actual audience that you're targeting, the actual readers or whoever's playing the game or watching the show. Then you have kind of the adults who are always, unfortunately,
ones.
around, you know, kind of
we don't know what to do with them.
just trying to check what is it they're reading, or so. How do we counter that? Sometimes you have a book that's, you know, a runaway success with the, you know, audience number one, the ones that really mattered. But their parents, their educators, you know, people who are around them have a totally opposing opinion, and they sometimes come down hard on the authors, saying, you know, how could you, how dare you, this is not appropriate. So again, I personally feel very strongly about this because I just don't know what messages we can send out to the secondary audience. You know, how can we calm them down? And
Do we need to, really?
I don't know. You tell me. Do we need to?
I don't care.
You can't, if you write with a primary audience, secondary audience, a reviewer, you'll never write, you'll never be a writer.
That's
And
right.
the job of the writer is not to please everybody, because
it's-
that's impossible.
It's already a difficult thing to do. I mean, I
Of
remember
course.
once there was this, I can't remember the name of the author, but the first thing he said as he was speaking was, writing is an ego-bruising business. So to begin with, you are really putting yourself out there for the audience, and then you get the secondary audience, which has different rules and different values, and you actually just need to write for your audience.
Yes.
But really, you first write for yourself. To me, I write for myself first, and of course, then when I wear the hat of an editor, then I think of the audience. But in the beginning, you have to write for yourself, I think.
Again, you guys are really helping me out with these segues. You're just doing a beautiful job here. What about the methods? How do you write for children? What does it differ in the methodology, the way you write your manuscripts? Is it in any way different than you would write for a different audience?
I always meet the characters first in my imagination. So before I start putting pen to paper, I allow myself to think about my character. It could sometimes be a year, it could sometimes be 2 weeks, but the character's voice, the central character's voice, is usually fully formed in my mind. That's even more important than story, the voice of the character, and then I'll work out structure very loosely. But I'm more of an organic writer. What I mean by that is I love only having a very general idea of where I'm going, and I allow myself to start writing, and I see where the story takes me. There was only 2 exceptions to that rule, which is Where the Streets Had a Name, my book set in Palestine, which is I knew the last line of the book before I started. So it was the adventure of how to get there. And then Noah's Law was my first legal thriller, which is a mystery novel. So of course I had to know what was going to happen so I could put the plots, the clues along the way. That was excruciating for me because even though I am a lawyer, actually,
Yes,
I'm not logical. That's why I left law after 10 years. I'm far more sort of creative, and to have to plot every chapter was very difficult for me. I love the adventure of sitting down, writing, and sometimes, this is going to sound very freaky, but I'm sure you'll agree with me, sometimes you arrive at a sentence and you think, how did I get there?
From? Why did she say that?
Exactly. You think, wow, that was a supernatural experience.
And you're thinking, am I going crazy?
Yeah, that's exciting.
That's true.
Okay, you know what? I'm actually going to look into the crowd and see if I can see any yawning faces, or
Hope not.
I think we still have their
Maybe they
attention,
have
which I salute you
Maybe
on.
we take questions?
Yeah, maybe we can open it up to the floor and see if anybody has any specific questions you'd like to direct to any panelists, any general questions, comments. Anyone?
Oh, wow, nobody wants to ask anything.
Yep. So we have there's a mic coming your way in a second. Thanks.
I like when Noura said that kids can smell the faults. My question is how you smell the needs of the young children, young adults, and helps you to write for them. And
Is that question
Is that directed to Noura?
or somebody else?
for anybody.
Okay, so who'd like to take a stab at this?
If
I think you have to observe them a lot. You have to read blogs that they write. You have to talk to them.
Yeah.
You have to listen to them, of course. You have to be close to them. And besides that, you have to remember, as a writer, how you were as a teenager, how you felt about things, what made you angry, what scared you, why were you anxious all the time. So you have to really dig into that. You have to know them.
Actually, Fatima, that brings another question before I take it back to the floor. But how relevant are our experiences?
Oh, that's
Do you know? Sometimes.
No, but there are universal characteristics of young adults. There is generation gap. There is building your identity. Our body is changing. There are universal issues that
those stand the test of time, I guess.
But also you have to continue to read young adults fiction. You can't just stop reading them. Read the ones that have become very popular, find out what the formula for the popularity was, and try to do it in another way. But popular means they liked something about it, and therefore it's an idea, it's a map in a way. We can't stop reading. One of the gentlemen speaking earlier said something that was to the effect of reading leads to writing, and then writing leads to reading. And then Dalia Ibrahim
Vicious
in the
cycle.
back, Dalia Ibrahim in the back said, "Duh." She didn't actually say "duh," but to that effect. And I said,
Paraphrasing.
no, but really, some people don't think that they're connected. If you're not a reader, then you're not a writer. You can't write if you don't read.
Yeah.
And so, in order to write for young adults, you have to read young adult fiction.
But also,
And
like
no.
you said, experience is very important. I think of being a writer as being an actor. With an actor, you have something called the method acting, where you will go and you will observe. So if you were playing the role of a homeless person, for example, you would go and you would watch homeless people. But then other people actually use their memories in order to evoke an emotion. And I'm very much like that. And that's what you do. And for example, speaking about how you sort of use memory as a way and experience. One of the books, one of my younger books for tweens, it came to me because of this exact thing about remembering my past. And it was an example of when I was doing my first boot camp class. I don't know, do you have boot camp where
No, not
you go
really.
out into a field and there's an instructor who basically almost beats you up to run around and do laps and push-ups? And I was very nervous. It was my first time. I arrived on the oval. There were about 30 people, most of them already talking among each other. They all knew each other, obviously. And I stood to the side, very nervous and shy. And then the instructor said, "Okay, everybody get into groups of 4. And I panicked because I thought, first of all, no one's going to pick me. And then even more embarrassing, the instructor will have to force me into a group. At this point, this was a week in which Scholastic had asked me to write a book for young people, and I didn't have an idea. The idea came to me in that moment on that football field because I realized that the need to belong, to fit in, and not to feel like a total loser never leaves you.
No.
And I went back to that feeling of being a primary school child, like I think as an elementary school, or a grade 6, and wanting and always being the last to get picked in sports. And I remembered then and there that feeling never goes. And I used that experience to write my book, which is all about bullying in schools. So as writers, we're always drawing on our experiences in order to write our characters' lives.
Great. Thanks for that. Do you have other questions, comments? Yes, please, Jihan. There's a mic coming your way, right there. Thanks. Thank you.
لا السؤال لرندا. رندا أنا قريت كتابك The Streets Have a Name. الكتب لها الشوارع لها اسم.
أسماء.
واستغربت جدا إنك ما عشت بفلسطين بس أخذت روح الجو الفلسطيني والتراث الفلسطيني والنكت الفلسطينية فكيف قدرت بس من خلال أهلك والتربية؟ وبعدين أنا كنت سعيدة لما سكولاستيك اتصلوا فيي وحدا من أمريكا يقول لي في كتاب عظيم جدا. عادة لما بكون في كتاب عن فلسطين بحاربوه ويعني صعب إنه يطلع. فيعني بحب شوي تحكي عن التجربة كيف قدرتي تعكسي الواقع الفلسطيني وانت اظن كل حياتك عشتي باستراليا اذا بفهم مضبوط بعرفش قديش زرتي ولا بس على قصه انه بعض الناس حبوه كثير بامريكا بس معلمه قالت لي لا صعب نعلمه بالمدارس لانه فيه شيء عن ستك هيك اللي فيه هي نكته اكثر بس قالت كيف بدنا نعلمه بالمدارس على اساس مرات مضبوط الامريكان باي كلمه غلط بالكتاب ممنوع يدخل المدرسة.
Well, there's two things. In Australia, actually, where the Streets Had a Name, which is set in Palestine, to me, it's the book that is closest to my heart. Remember, I told you before about the Inkies Award, the book that's voted by a Chewed Australian. It won the best book of the year in Australia. Wow. And why I loved that award was because it wasn't the adults, it was the young people who chose it. And I thought, yay, go Palestine. And
Good
then
on you.
I just found out it's going to be studied in schools in Australia as well this year.
Awesome.
So, alhamdulillah, in Australia and in America, I'm hearing as well that the conversation is changing. But why was I able to write it? Because I've lived and breathed Palestine since I was a child. My dad used to take us to the Palestinian club meetings every Saturday, and they would have pictures of the Intifada. And, it's been in my blood, and I've been an activist. If most people in Australia know me as the Palestinian activist, and I wear that label very, very proudly. It's something I'm very, very passionate about. I went to Palestine for the first time just before the second Intifada with my parents, and it changed my life, seeing my father's village, witnessing what, you know, the occupation. And when I wrote Where the Streets Had a Name, I had my computer in front of a wall, and I had all the pictures that I took. And I also was on blogs and speaking to people. And I connected with one boy who lived in Bethlehem. And I asked him, as a writer, the details are important. And I said to him, what color are the flowers on this road at this time of year?
Oh,
and he went and
that's
found
nice.
out for me. But then he did something very risky. He went to a checkpoint to take photos.
Oh, okay.
And then he said,
And was
Is he
failed.
still with us?
he said, I risked my life for your book. I said, I didn't ask for that. But so it was a process of memory and research.
The research is very important,
Yeah.
obviously, yes.
How do you research science fiction?
You live it.
You research the science part of
But
it.
yeah, the science, which is like, you watch Discovery Channel a lot.
So, anyone else? I want you to mentally take about 5 steps this way and just kind of, forget the stage and
Yeah. Well,
So, anyone?
No, we've got
Yes.
there we go.
Hamad Nabulsi, all the way up front.
And
We can hear you.
And then there's one in the middle.
Yeah, but I'd still rather use the mic. Maybe the people in the back won't be able to hear the
Right.
question. So,
محمد النابلسي. كنت بدي أسأل عن شيء الكتاب الكويس سويناه طبعا وهو احنا متأكدين منيح انه هو بيوصل لليافعين. طيب كيف بدنا نوصلهم؟ يعني كيف بدنا نشجعهم على قراءته ضمن كل هالمعطيات الجديدة اللي عنا اياها؟ يعني اليوم كنا بنحكي عن الأنشطة القراءة، هاي كلها كنا متفقين انها موجهة للأطفال في مرحلة المدرسة او الطفولة المبكرة تقريبا. طب يافعين شو لازم نسويهم؟ شو فعلا ايش هي الطريقه اللي لازم نسويها؟ هل هو الكتاب الالكتروني اهم؟ هل السينما هي اللي بتساعدنا على هذا الموضوع؟ هذا السؤال. السؤال الثاني اللي كنت بدي اسال فيه استاذه فاطمه شرف الدين، لما حكيتي عن موضوع انه اليافعين بيختلفوا من بلد لبلد، طب ليه هاري بوتر مثلا وصل لكل اليافعين في كل العالم؟ ايش هي المعادله السريه اللي بنقدر نوصل فيها لليافعين في كل الوطن العربي؟
هلا قلت شيء انه لما قيس كنت عم تسالني عن قلت شيء في شيء يونيفرسال، يعني عم بيقول لي طب نحن مراهقتنا بتختلف عن مراهقه الاطفال اليوم، اليونج ادلتس اليوم. نحكي بالانجليزي او بالعربي؟
اللي يريحك. في لايف ترانزليشن فاتس اب تو يو.
في شيء يونيفرسال، وهاري بوتر شد الأطفال، وعلى فكرة بالعالم العربي عم يقروا أكثر شيء بالإنجليزي مش بالعربي، مع أنه ترجم للعربي. في موضوع اللغة هيدي مشكلة كبيرة.
صح.
يعني كل الأدب اللي عم ينكتب للمراهقين هو منه كتير، في قليل منه منيح، بس في كمية من أدب الأطفال عم تنكتب بعدها بأسلوب تقيل، يعني أسلوب جمل طويلة فيها كتير وصف وكل هالقصص. هل كيف لسؤالك الأول كيف بدنا نوصل لهم؟ بدنا نبلش من هن وصغار أول شيء، يعني القراءة بتبلش من سن الولادة مفروض، وهيك إذا ضليتك معهم بيطلعوا. بس كمان نتأكد من المدارس إذا قرروا الكتاب ما يستخدموه كأداة تعليمية، يعني ما يخلوا الطفل يقرأ الكتاب أو المراهق يقرأ الكتاب بعدين يقولوا له لخصه أو احكي لي من هي الشخصيات الرئيسية. صح. شو مواصفات هالبطل. أو هيدي المشكلة إنه بعدنا عم نستخدم الكتاب وبعد ما طلعنا من فكرة إنه الكتاب هو أداة تعليمية، فبس نطلع من هاي الفكرة الكتاب بيوصل بكتير أسهل للطفل للقارئ.
وحتى لما يستخدمونه باللغة الإنجليزية when they use the stories and the novels, they don't actually ask them those questions. What they ask them is, how do you think this person felt? It's so completely different. Why do you think she did this? And this is something about, growing up. about being able to analyze why people do what they do, motivation, cause and effect. It isn't about what happened and, just give us the entire
But it's good
story.
if they ask them to think critically.
Exactly.
It's okay.
That's what they do in English, but they don't do that in Arabic. But who still remembers Al-Mughamarin al-Khamsa? I know Tamar wants to jump up and down over there. See, Al-Mughamarin al-Khamsa is Enid Blyton's famous five
yeah.
in Arabic, in Egypt, and it was the most addictive reading when I was a teenager. And I didn't require anyone to be, on my back reading. So what is it that made that so addictive to the point where my husband, now of course, admits to me that when he was a child, used to steal it from the bookshop. He used to steal that, and he used to put it in his book. Instead of studying, his mom would walk in, she'd find him with a book, and she'd think he's studying, but really he had the famous five in the middle of his textbook. Why? Why did he do that? What's that formula? And we were teens at the time. Yeah. We were reading about teens. Yeah. And we had it. We actually had it. And I wish they would, I think they do have reprints. Tamer, the expert on Al-Mughamarin al-Khamsa, do they still reprint them? Dalia knows. Dalia, the expert.
Yeah, I still can find it in our bookshop.
You can.
It's a very old bookshop, so very traditional.
I wish we can have those. You can still find them in Egypt.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
But it highlights a point that it's not an issue of the language now, is it? I mean, a lot of people, you hear them and they say, you can't do this in Arabic.
Yes.
Arabic is boring, it's difficult, it's heavy, it's cumbersome. English is nice and cool and fast and snappy. You can do it in English, but not in Arabic. And I take that very personally. It is all doable in any language. The language is just a vehicle now, isn't it? And we can point to many examples where the language didn't matter. We sat there because of the entertainment weight of the content. Yep.
But if I may also, we seem to have double standards in the Arab world, and I don't understand why we do it, and other cultures also do it. And this is an example from an author called Tim Bowler, and his series of books is called The Blade.
The Blade.
And it's this young man, this teenager who kills using a blade. He's a street person, he's in a gang, and he does this. And Tim Bowler's book is very, very popular in South Korea. In South Korea, Tim Bowler was being, hosted, and he was talking to people, and he was saying, well, maybe one day it can be translated into South Korean. And they all went, no, we can't translate it into South Korean. Why not? Because we can't have those sort of people. We can't have kids using blades and killing people. Their kids read those books in English, but they will not allow those books to be translated into South Korean.
Yep.
What is that?
It's because it will give it legitimacy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the hypocrisy of
the
it.
hypocrisy of it.
I've been given the universal sign for your time is up. Either that or somebody wants my head. Thank you so much for being a very attentive audience. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. Please give them a well-deserved round of applause.
Thank you.